Now we are going to discuss shock. Shock is very important. It is asked almost every year in each and every paper. So what is shock? It's a clinical syndrome resulting from inadequate tissue perfusion. Okay. Now see the classification of shock. There are various classifications, but we are going to discuss the classification which is given in Harrison. So see the classification of shock. Classification of shock. Okay. So what is the most common type of shock? It is the hypovolemic shock. The most common type of shock is the hypovolemic shock. Other types are traumatic shock, cardiogenic shock, septic shock, neurogenic shock, hypoadrenal shock. You know that in septic shock there are two phases. One is early phase and one is late phase. Early phase is hyperdynamic and the late phase is hypodynamic. So in septic shock there are two phases. Early phase is hyperdynamic and the late phase is hypodynamic. Clear? So this is the classification system given in Harrison. We are going to follow this. I want that you should remember these two formulas which we will be using frequently in this chapter. What first? Blood pressure is equal to cardiac output into total peripheral resistance, and cardiac output is equal to stroke volume into heart rate. You have to remember we will be using this formula in this whole chapter. Blood pressure is equal to cardiac output into total peripheral resistance, and cardiac output is equal to stroke volume into heart rate. First of all, we are going to discuss hypovolemic shock, and we discussed that this is the most common type of shock. Okay, so in hypovolemic shock there is hypovolemia. What is the cause of hypovolemia? So it can be caused by blood loss, it can be caused by plasma loss or loss of body sodium and water. So what are the causes of hypovolemic shock? See the causes. Okay, so commonly in surgery we are getting patients of trauma leading to blood loss, leading to hypovolemic shock. So first, blood loss. Clear? And this blood loss can be because of trauma, and sometimes whenever we are going to operate the patient, because of breathing also patient will be having hypovolemic shock. So there is trauma leading to bleeding, leading to hypovolemic shock, and there can be bleeding. This bleeding can be external or internal. Sometimes you will find the patients who are having hemothorax. Sometimes there is massive collection of blood in the retroperitoneum or in the pelvis. So what? Bleeding can be internal, it can be internal, or it can be external. Okay. Second is loss of plasma. This is because of sequestration of fluid. Especially in burns patient, you have seen that in burns patient what happens? There is capillary damage. So there is extravasation of fluid. And what happens? There is edema. So there is third space loss. So second cause is loss of plasma or plasma loss, and it occurs because of fluid sequestration. So this is because of fluid sequestration, also known as third space loss, right? And classically we see this in patients of burns. Third, if there is loss of body sodium or water, whenever any patient is having multiple episodes of vomiting, there is massive diarrhea, loss of 4 to 6 liters of fluid in stools. So this can also lead to hypovolemic shock. So third is loss of body sodium and water. Sodium and water. And what are the common causes? It is caused by vomiting and diarrhea. So these are the common causes. Clear? So these are the causes of hypovolemic shock. So what you noticed here, that there is loss of volume. So what's the problem? There is decreased intravascular volume. Clear? And if there is decreased intravascular volume, what's the problem? There is decreased venous return to the heart. So there is decreased ventricular filling, and if there is decreased ventricular filling, there is decreased stroke volume, and if there is decreased stroke volume, there is decreased cardiac output. So see the sequence of events. Loss of volume, so there is decreased intravascular volume. Because of this, there is decreased venous return to the heart. Because of decreased venous return, there is decreased stroke volume. Why? Because there is decreased ventricular filling. And if there is decreased stroke volume, these patients have decreased cardiac output. We discussed that cardiac output is equal to stroke volume into heart rate, right? So because of decreased cardiac output, these patients will be having low blood pressure. We discussed that blood pressure is equal to cardiac output into total peripheral resistance. So what will happen? Because of this decreased cardiac output, there is inadequate tissue perfusion, and in the body there is compensatory mechanism activation, like there is increased tone of sympathetic system. So what's the problem? There is inadequate tissue perfusion. Inadequate tissue perfusion. This is one problem. And there is activation of compensatory mechanism. So there is compensatory mechanism activation. And because of this compensatory mechanism activation, what's the problem? There is increased sympathetic tone. So there is increased release of adrenaline, noradrenaline, and this sympathetic activation leads to increased pulse rate. So patient will be having tachycardia, and there is increased total peripheral resistance. So because of this, what's the problem? There is increased sympathetic tone. Clear? And there is increased release of adrenaline and noradrenaline, right? And that's why these patients will be having increased pulse rate and increased total peripheral resistance. Why? Can you see here? So whenever there is increased pulse rate or heart rate, yes, it is going to maintain the cardiac output initially, but later it's not able to. So initially you are going to notice that in patients of hypovolemic shock, there is maintained cardiac output. Later patient is going to develop hypotension. Now see what's the problem. If there is inadequate tissue perfusion, what happens? There is anaerobic metabolism. And if there is anaerobic metabolism, these patients are prone to develop lactic acidosis. And if there is lactic acidosis, patients are prone to develop metabolic acidosis. Clear? So this is the pathophysiology of hypovolemic shock. Simple. Now see, the signs and symptoms will be dependent on this pathophysiology. So first, the patients are having inadequate tissue perfusion. So if there is inadequate tissue perfusion, there will be cold and clammy peripheries or skin. There is decreased renal blood flow. Because of decreased renal blood flow, there will be decreased GFR. And if there is decreased GFR, these patients will be having decreased urine output. There is decreased cerebral blood flow. And since there is decreased cerebral blood flow, patients will be having drowsiness and confusion. Okay, so see the clinical features of hypovolemic shock. First, because of inadequate tissue perfusion, what are the signs and symptoms? So these patients will be having cold and clammy peripheries or skin. Second, there is decreased renal blood flow, and because of decreased renal blood flow, there is decreased GFR, and because of this decreased GFR, initially patient is having oliguria, and in severe cases this can lead to anuria. So initially patient is having oliguria, later there can be anuria. Another problem, there is decreased cerebral blood flow, and because of decreased cerebral blood flow, these patients will be having drowsiness and confusion. So what? There is drowsiness and confusion. Okay, now see, patients are having metabolic acidosis, and because of this metabolic acidosis, the patient is having tachypnea. So what is the problem? Patient is having tachypnea. Now another problem, these patients have increased sympathetic tone. So here there is increased pulse rate, means patient is having tachycardia. These patients are having weakened 3D pulse. Because of activation of sympathetic tone, increased release of adrenaline and noradrenaline, these patients are having sweating also. Because of increased heart rate, we discussed that initially body is trying to maintain cardiac output, but later patient is going to develop hypotension. So because of increased sympathetic tone, what's the problem? These patients are having tachycardia, there is weak 3D pulse, weakened 3D pulse, clear? These patients have sweating, and initially cardiac output is maintained, followed by hypotension. So these are the signs and symptoms of hypovolemic shock. Now see, based on amount of blood loss, the hypovolemic shock is further divided into 4 classes. So what are the 4 classes? See, classification of hypovolemic shock. First, class 1. So how much blood loss is going to occur in class 1? Up to 15% of blood volume. So blood loss is up to 15%. Clear? In class 1, compensatory mechanism maintains the cardiac output. Since compensatory mechanism maintains cardiac output in class 1, it is also known as compensated hypovolemic shock. So what's the other name of class 1? It's also known as compensated hypovolemic shock. Clear? So compensatory mechanism maintains the cardiac output. What happens in class 2? In class 2, how much blood loss is there? In class 2, there is blood loss 15 to 30% of blood volume. So how much? It's the 15 to 30%. So what are the manifestations? So in class 2, there is hypoxemia, there is low BP, means hypotension, there is generalized vasoconstriction, and how much is the urine output? It's 20 to 30 ml per hour. In class 3, there is blood loss of 30 to 40% of blood volume. So class 3, how much blood loss? It's 30 to 40%. So in class 3, there is decreased cardiac output and there is decreased systolic blood pressure. That's why it is known as decompensated shock. Why? There is decreased cardiac output, decreased systolic blood pressure, and that's why it is known as decompensated shock. This is decompensated shock. Okay, see what are the manifestations. So in class 3, there is hypotension, there is tachycardia. What should be the pulse rate? Generally here, the pulse rate is more than 120 per minute. These patients have tachypnea and the urine output is 5 to 15 ml per hour. How much was the urine output in class 2? It was 20 to 30 ml per hour. Here it's 5 to 15 ml per hour, and the patient is confused. So patient appears confused. Class 4, in which there is loss of more than 40% of blood volume, and that's known as refractory shock. So see the class 4. In class 4, how much is the blood loss? Here there is loss of more than 40% of blood volume, and it's also known as refractory shock. Refractory shock. Now see what are the manifestations seen in class 4. So in class 4 patient, there is marked hypotension, and what's the pulse rate here? Here it's more than 140 per minute. So there is tachycardia, tachypnea, and these patients have no urine output. It's almost nil, and patient is comatose. Clear? So these are the special features of various classes. Now we are going to discuss in detail the classification, ATLS classification of hypovolemic shock, and we are going to discuss the ATLS modification also. Now 2 one-liner questions are asked in relation to shock, that what is the best clinical indicator of tissue perfusion? Best clinical indicator of tissue perfusion is urine output. And what should be the minimum urine output after adequate tissue perfusion? In adults, after adequate tissue perfusion, the minimum urine output should be 1 ml per minute, and this is equivalent to 60 ml per hour. And in children, it should be 0.5 to 1 ml per minute, and that is 30 to 60 ml per hour. So question is, what is the best clinical indicator of tissue perfusion in shock patients? So it is the urine output. Second question, best indicator to estimate fluid required for resuscitation, and that is CVP, central venous pressure. It's the best indicator to estimate the fluid required for resuscitation. So these are two one-liner questions which are frequently asked. Now we are going to discuss in detail the ATLS classification of hypovolemic shock. According to ATLS modification, there are 4 classes of shock we discussed. Now see, how much is the blood loss in class 1? We discussed the blood loss is 0 to 15% in class 1. In class 2, it is 15 to 30%. In class 3, 30 to 40%, and in class 4, how much is the blood loss? More than 40%. This question was asked many times in AIIMS and NEET. Simple question on the basis of percentage of blood loss. Okay, second, now see the CNS manifestations. In class 1, patient is slightly anxious. In class 2, patient is mildly anxious. And in class 3, patient is anxious or confused, whereas in class 4, patient is confused or lethargic. So here, patient is anxious or confused, clear? And in class 4, patient is confused or lethargic. Patient is confused or lethargic, clear? Now see, how much is the pulse rate? In class 1, the pulse rate is less than 100 per minute. How much? It's less than 100 per minute. In class 2, it is more than 100 per minute. In class 3, it's more than 120, and in class 4, it's more than 140. So here, more than 120 per minute, and in class 4, it's more than 140 per minute. Clear? Now coming to the blood pressure. See, the blood pressure is normal in class 1 and class 2. So it's normal in class 1 and class 2, whereas it is decreased in class 3 and class 4. Clear? Pulse pressure is only normal in class 1. In class 2, class 3 and class 4, it is decreased. Now see the respiratory rate. In class 1, it is 14 to 20 per minute. How much? It's 14 to 20. In class 2, it is 20 to 30 per minute. Clear? In class 3, it is 30 to 40 per minute. Whereas in class 4, it is more than 35 per minute. So this is the respiratory rate. Now see, how much is the urine output? This is very, very important. In class 1, it is more than 30 ml per hour. How much? More than 30 ml per hour. In class 2, it is 20 to 30 ml per hour, whereas in class 3, it is 5 to 15, and in class 4, the urine output is almost nil. So class 3, it is 5 to 15 ml per hour, and in class 4, it is almost nil, means there is negligible urine output. So there is anuria. So for resuscitation, which fluid should be given? So if you're talking about class 1 and class 2, in class 1 and class 2, crystalloids are sufficient. But in class 3 and class 4, we have to give blood also with crystalloids. So which fluids? Generally, in class 1 and class 2, crystalloids are sufficient. So we give crystalloids in both. And whereas in class 3 and class 4, we give crystalloids plus blood. Clear? So crystalloids plus blood is given in class 3 and class 4. Now see, according to 2018 ATLS modification, there was one addition in this classification about base deficit. So how much base deficit should be there in class 1? So in class 1, it's 0 to -2 milliequivalent per liter. This is -2 to -6 milliequivalent per liter. So in class 3, it is -6 to -10 milliequivalent per liter, and in class 4, it is -10 or less. Okay, so 6 to minus 10 milli equivalent per liter, and here minus 10 or less. Clear? So this is very important. This classification is frequently asked in exams. Now we are going to discuss cardiogenic shock. And what happens in cardiogenic shock? There is impaired pumping ability of heart to pump blood. So what happens? There is impaired pumping ability of heart to pump blood. So it is characterized by impaired pumping ability of heart. Okay. So especially the left ventricle is not able to pump blood out of the left ventricle. What are the causes of cardiogenic shock? See the list. Causes of cardiogenic shock. So it can be caused by systolic dysfunction because of myocardial infarction. If patient is taking myocardial depressants, like patient is taking calcium channel blockers, patient is taking beta blockers or antiarrhythmics. So if patient is taking calcium channel blockers, beta blockers or antiarrhythmics. Clear? So all these leads to systolic dysfunction. Now see diastolic dysfunction. If the patient is having ventricular hypertrophy, there is restrictive cardiomyopathy, or patient is having cardiac tamponade. It can be caused by valvular structure abnormalities, like the patients who are having papillary muscle rupture. Patient is having some kind of valvular abnormality like aortic valve regurgitation, or if there is mitral valve regurgitation, or patients who are having arrhythmia, especially the ventricular arrhythmia. This also leads to cardiogenic shock. So now see what's the problem in cardiogenic shock. In cardiogenic shock, there is impaired pumping ability of which ventricle? Especially left ventricle. So it is characterized by impaired pumping ability, okay, of left ventricle. So what will happen? If there is impaired pumping ability of left ventricle, so there is decreased stroke volume. If there is decreased stroke volume, there is decreased cardiac output. And if there is decreased cardiac output, what will happen? There is decreased BP. So these patients will be having hypotension, and there is impaired tissue perfusion. One problem. Second problem, if there is impaired pumping ability of left ventricle, so there is inadequate systolic emptying. It means even after systole, there is huge amount of blood or significant amount of blood collected into left ventricle, and because of that there is increased left ventricular filling pressure. It means there is increased preload, and if there is increased left ventricular filling pressure, there is increased left atrial pressure. And what will happen? There are back pressure changes, so there is increased pulmonary and capillary pressure. That's why these patients have increased risk of development of what? Pulmonary edema. So see the sequence of events. There are two problems here. First, there is decreased stroke volume, and if there is decreased stroke volume, there is decreased cardiac output, and if there is decreased cardiac output, there is decreased blood pressure. Because of this, what happens? These patients have impaired tissue perfusion. So there is impaired tissue perfusion. One problem. Second problem, what happens? There is inadequate systolic emptying. Inadequate systolic emptying. Clear? And because of this inadequate systolic emptying, the left ventricle is filled with blood even after systole. Because of that, there is increased pressure. So what will happen? There is increased left ventricular filling pressure. It means what is increased? There is increased preload. So in these patients, there is increased preload. And if there is increased left ventricular filling pressure, so obviously left atrial pressure is also increased. So the problem, there is increased left atrial pressure. And if left atrial pressure is increased, so because of back pressure changes, what's the problem? There is increased pulmonary artery and capillary pressure. So it leads to increased pulmonary artery and capillary pressure. Clear? And because of this, what's the problem? These patients are going to develop pulmonary edema. So these patients are going to develop pulmonary edema. Clear? So this is the pathophysiology of cardiogenic shock. Now see, in patients of cardiogenic shock, the clinical manifestations are dependent on the etiology. So here the clinical manifestations are dependent on etiology. Imagine the patient is having cardiogenic shock because of myocardial failure. So if the patient is having signs of myocardial failure, okay, so in these patients, what are the manifestations? So in these patients, there is increased JVP, jugular venous pressure is increased, there is basal course crackles, patients are having tachypnea and hypotension. Suppose cardiogenic shock is because of obstructive cause like cardiac tamponade. So if it's because of obstructive cause like cardiac tamponade, we discussed that cardiac tamponade is characterized by a triad. And what's the name of that triad? It's Bake's triad. What are the components of Bake's triad? Muffled heart sound, distended neck veins, and hypotension. So it is characterized by Bake's triad. So patients will be having these manifestations. And how to remember? The mnemonic is MDH. Asli masale such MDH. Clear? So this is muffled heart sound, muffled heart sounds. D, that's distended neck veins, distended neck veins, and H is hypotension. So this is hypotension. And you know that in patients of cardiac tamponade, there is pulsus paradoxus. Clear? So these are the manifestations which are seen in obstructive causes like cardiac tamponade. Now see the manifestations in the patients of pulmonary embolism. So if the patient is having pulmonary embolism, these patients have sudden onset dyspnea. There is tachypnea. These patients have hypotension, tachycardia. Because of pulmonary embolism, there is localized pleural rub also. And if the patient is having massive embolism, in those cases, patient is having severe central chest pain. So there is severe central chest pain in the patients having massive embolism. Massive embolism. What are the other signs and symptoms? Other signs and symptoms of cardiogenic shock. So there are cold, clammy peripheries, there is pallor, and patient can develop both central and peripheral cyanosis. So these are the manifestations which are seen in patients of cardiogenic shock. Manifestations are dependent on the etiology. Now we are going to discuss septic shock. So what is septic shock? It is the sepsis which leads to shock or hypotension, and that cannot be corrected by fluid resuscitation. So septic shock, it's the sepsis leading to hypotension that cannot be corrected by fluid resuscitation. Okay, so what happens here? Here, sepsis is associated with hypotension, clear, and it cannot be corrected by fluid resuscitation. Okay, it cannot be corrected by fluid resuscitation. Simple, but see, it's a very crude definition. So what's the definition of septic shock? So the definition of septic shock is it's a sepsis plus hypotension for at least 1 hour, despite of adequate fluid resuscitation. Clear? And what is the definition of hypotension here? Either systolic blood pressure is less than 90 mmHg, or it's 40 mmHg less than normal value, less than normal BP or normal value. So here definition of hypotension means systolic blood pressure less than 90 mmHg, or the systolic blood pressure is 40 mmHg less than the normal BP. Clear? So sepsis plus hypotension for at least 1 hour despite of adequate fluid resuscitation. Or there is need for vasopressors to maintain what? Systolic blood pressure more than 90 mmHg or mean arterial pressure more than 70 mmHg. Clear? So this is the definition of septic shock. There is another definition which is asked, and that's known as refractory septic shock. So see what's refractory septic shock? Refractory septic shock. Refractory septic shock is septic shock which lasts for more than 1 hour and it does not respond to either fluid or pressure administration. Clear? So it's the septic shock for more than 1 hour of duration and it does not respond to fluid or pressure administration. Right? Now see, what are the causes of septic shock? The name is septic shock. It means it is caused by sepsis. It means the cause is either bacteria or fungi or virus. In bacteria, there are two groups. One is gram positive and second is gram negative. So overall, this question is asked that which organism is most commonly responsible for septic shock, and it's the gram negative bacteria. Why? Because gram negative bacteria are having endotoxins in their cell wall. And this endotoxin is responsible. Okay, so see what are the causes of septic shock. So it is caused by sepsis. So it's caused by sepsis. Okay, so sepsis by bacteria, by fungi or virus. Simple. In bacteria there are two groups, gram positive and gram negative. So if this question is asked in exam, these are the four organisms: gram positive bacteria, gram negative bacteria, fungi, virus. Which group is responsible or most commonly responsible for septic shock? So it's the gram negative bacteria which is most commonly responsible. Why it is most commonly responsible? Because this bacteria is having endotoxin in the cell wall. Endotoxins in the cell wall. Clear? So you know that in the cell wall of bacteria there is exotoxin and endotoxin, and which one is responsible for septic shock? Mainly it's the endotoxin. Clear? So if we see the cell wall of bacteria, it contains exotoxin and endotoxin. Simple. And this endotoxin is responsible. So what is the effect of this endotoxin? It is going to cause increased release of inflammatory mediators, and because of this increased release of inflammatory mediators, what happens? There is vasodilatation. So what is the effect? There is increased release of inflammatory mediators. Clear? And because of these inflammatory mediators, there is vasodilatation. Clear? There is increased capillary permeability. So there is vasodilatation. There is increased capillary permeability. Okay? Increased capillary permeability. Now see, because of vasodilatation and increased capillary permeability, there is altered peripheral circulation and there is massive vasodilatation. And because of this massive vasodilatation, there is pooling of blood. And since there is massive vasodilatation in septic shock, you are going to find warm peripheries. So what's the effect? There is altered peripheral circulation, altered peripheral circulation, and there is massive vasodilatation. Clear? And because of this massive vasodilatation, there is pooling of blood. Clear? And because of this pooling, what happens? There is hypotension or shock. Clear? Now see, we discussed hypovolemic shock, and in hypovolemic shock there was increased release of noradrenaline and adrenaline, so there was vasoconstriction, and that's why there was cold and clammy peripheries. And here what you noticed, here you noticed that there is massive vasodilatation, and because of this massive vasodilatation there is pooling of blood. So here you are going to find what? Warm peripheries. So because of massive vasodilatation we find warm peripheries in septic shock. Okay, so this is the pathophysiology. Now see, you have noticed that certain patients of septic shock or certain patients who are having infection, in those patients there is multi-organ dysfunction syndrome, or because of some insult or because of trauma, also because of some kind of injury, patient is going to develop multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. So you will notice that pathophysiology of multi-organ dysfunction syndrome, it's very similar to septic shock. Have a look. So what happens? We discussed that after infection there is release of inflammatory mediators, and after release of inflammatory mediators there is systemic inflammatory response, and because of this systemic inflammatory response, see the changes. There is diffuse endothelial injury, extensive vasodilatation, increased capillary permeability. Because of all these things there is progressive vasodilatation. So what's the problem? Progressive vasodilatation, and there is maldistribution of blood flow. And if there is maldistribution of blood flow, what will be the problem? There is organ hypoperfusion, and because of this organ hypoperfusion, patients are going to develop MODS, that's also known as multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. If you remember, in the chapter of acute pancreatitis, we discussed that if death occurs within 2 weeks of hospitalization, what happens? The most common cause of death in patients of acute pancreatitis is multi-organ dysfunction syndrome, and if it occurs after 2 weeks, it is because of sepsis. So what happens? It's not only infection which can lead to multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. It can occur because of any kind of insult, because of injury. Clear? So any kind of inflammatory situation, any kind of injury can also lead to multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. Now see, what are the clinical features of septic shock? Okay, so here there is sepsis, so it's very easy to remember. If there is sepsis, there is fever, there is chills and rigor, and you can find local evidence of infection. Fever, chills and rigor, local evidence of infection. In septic shock there is massive vasodilatation, and because of this massive vasodilatation there is warm peripheries, bounding pulse, and rapid capillary filling. Clear? So what happens in septic shock? Because of sepsis you will find there is fever, there is chills and rigor, and what happens? There is evidence of local infection. So this is because of sepsis. Okay, and there is massive vasodilatation. So what's the effect? Because of vasodilatation, these patients are having warm peripheries, there is bounding pulse, warm peripheries, bounding pulse, rapid capillary filling, there is rapid capillary filling. Clear? And since there is shock, so obviously these patients are having hypotension. So these are the clinical manifestations of septic shock. Now we are going to discuss neurogenic shock. Okay, so what happens in neurogenic shock? What's the cause? It results from loss or suppression of sympathetic tone. So what's the problem here? It results from loss or suppression of sympathetic tone. Okay, so if there is loss or suppression of sympathetic tone, so because of this, what will be the problem? You will notice that these patients are having massive vasodilatation. Not only in veins, there is arterial vasodilatation also, and because of this, what is going to happen? These patients will be having warm peripheries, warm and dry peripheries. These patients, because of loss or suppression of sympathetic tone, there is bradycardia. So these are two characteristic features. By the way, first see what are the causes of neurogenic shock. So see the causes of neurogenic shock. So neurogenic shock can result from high cervical spinal cord injury. You have seen in OT that whenever we give spinal anesthesia and there is cephalad migration, so inadvertent cephalad migration of spinal anesthesia, sometimes if deep GA is given, deep general anesthesia, so what is the problem? Because of this deep general anesthesia, what it is going to depress vasomotor tone. So deep GA can depress vasomotor tone and it can also lead to neurogenic shock. You might find such patients in head injury. So devastating head injury can also lead to neurogenic shock. Now see, what's the pathophysiology of neurogenic shock? So in patients of neurogenic shock, there is disruption of sympathetic nervous system. So what's the problem? There is disruption of sympathetic nervous system. Okay, and because of this disruption of sympathetic nervous system, what happens? There is loss of sympathetic tone, and if there is loss of sympathetic tone, what happens? There is massive arterial and venous vasodilatation. So what's the problem here? It can result to venous as well as arterial vasodilatation. Clear? And if there is venous and arterial vasodilatation, what's the problem? There is pooling of blood, and if there is pooling of blood in the peripheries, in veins and arteries, what happens? It is going to decrease the venous return to the heart, and if there is decreased venous return, there is decreased stroke volume, and if there is decreased stroke volume, there is decreased cardiac output, and if there is decreased cardiac output, it leads to what? Organ hypoperfusion and shock. So what is the effect? There is decreased venous return. Because of this, there is decreased stroke volume, and because of this, there is decreased cardiac output, and because of this, what's the problem? There is impaired tissue perfusion. And what's the problem? There is cellular metabolism, which is also impaired. So impaired cellular metabolism. Okay, so this is the pathophysiology of neurogenic shock. Now it's very, very important because many times in AIIMS there were questions related to neurogenic shock. First, see here, in this patient there is loss of sympathetic tone. So because of this loss of sympathetic tone, what is the clinical manifestation? These patients will be having what? Bradycardia. Clinical manifestation, first, bradycardia. Second, these patients are having venous and arterial vasodilatation. Because of that, there is pooling of blood. So what happens? There is warm and dry skin. So second problem, these patients have warm and dry skin. Clear? If there is decreased cardiac output, so obviously what happens? There is hypotension. There is impaired tissue perfusion, organ perfusion. What happens? So these patients have hypothermia. And if it's because of some kind of injury, if it's because of some kind of head injury, so what happens? There is paralysis below the site of lesion. So another manifestation that these patients might have, paralysis below the site of lesion. Clear? So what are the clinical manifestations of neurogenic shock? Paralysis below the site of lesion in cases of trauma or in cases of injury. There is bradycardia, warm and dry skin, hypotension, hypothermia. Now in AIIMS, two questions are asked. See, there are patients of road traffic accident, two patients. Both of these patients are having shock. So at the time of presentation, both patients have shock. Okay. In one patient, what happens? One patient was having bradycardia. Second patient was having tachycardia. One patient was having warm and dry skin, and second was patient was having cold and clammy skin. Clear? This is the presentation. So one patient was having bradycardia, warm and dry skin. Second patient was having tachycardia and cold and clammy skin. Tell me the diagnosis. So if you see the first patient, because of trauma, there was neurogenic shock. Clear? Because there is bradycardia and warm and dry skin. And in second patient, because of trauma, there is bleeding, and because of this bleeding, patient is having hypovolemic shock. So you know that in hypovolemic shock, there is release of noradrenaline and adrenaline, and because of that, there is vasoconstriction. That's why there is cold clammy skin here. In neurogenic shock, there is loss of sympathetic tone, and that's why patient is having vasodilatation, and that's why patients are having bradycardia and warm and dry skin. So this is the differentiating feature, and easily we can crack the correct answer in the exam. Now we are going to discuss hypoadrenal shock. Now what happens in normal individuals, because of stress, surgery, illness and trauma, there is increased release of cortisol from adrenal. This is the normal response. Now imagine if a patient is having unrecognized adrenal insufficiency. In these patients, in cases of stress, trauma, surgery or illness, what happens? There is decreased release or no release of cortisol from adrenal, and it is going to complicate the host response, and this is known as what? Hypoadrenal shock. Okay, so what happens? Normally, in normal individuals, what happens? If there is stress, in cases of surgery, in cases of illness or trauma, what happens? There is increased cortisol release from adrenal. So it's from adrenal. Clear? This is the normal response. Okay, but if the patient is having unrecognized adrenal insufficiency, if there is unrecognized adrenal insufficiency, so what's the problem? In these situations, yes, the host response is complicated. So there is complicated host response, because now there is no release or lesser release. Clear? And this complicated host response in patients having adrenal insufficiency, this is known as hypoadrenal shock. Okay, generally these questions are asked in medicine, and they ask you what's the most common cause of hypoadrenal shock. So the most common cause of hypoadrenal shock is chronic administration of high doses of exogenous glucocorticoids. Clear? So see the causes. What are the causes of hypoadrenal shock? And the most important causes, most common causes, it's the chronic administration of high doses of exogenous glucocorticoids. Clear? Exogenous glucocorticoids. There are other causes of adrenal insufficiency also. So it can occur because of, so there can be adrenal insufficiency. Clear? And what are the common causes of adrenal insufficiency? So it can occur because of metastatic disease to adrenal, or patient is having amyloidosis, patient is having bilateral adrenal hemorrhage. If patient is receiving etomidate during anesthesia, what is the effect of this etomidate? It is going to cause adrenal suppression. So this etomidate, it can cause adrenal suppression. In India, tuberculosis is also one of the common causes of adrenal insufficiency, or sometimes there is idiopathic atrophy. Clear? So how to remember? The mnemonic is Ma Beti. Clear? So it's Ma Beti. Okay, metastatic disease, amyloidosis, bilateral adrenal hemorrhage, etomidate, tuberculosis and idiopathic atrophy. Now see, what are the clinical manifestations of hypoadrenal shock? Okay, so in these patients there is loss of homeostasis. So there is loss of homeostasis, there is decreased systemic vascular resistance, decreased systemic vascular resistance. These patients have hypovolemia, and because of this, what's the problem? There is decreased cardiac output leading to hypotension and shock. So these are the clinical manifestations of hypoadrenal shock. Now the question which is asked almost every year, it's related to physiological characteristics of various types of shock. So this table is very important, you have to remember, because every year there is one question. So what happens in hypovolemia? There is loss of blood volume, loss of plasma volume, loss of body sodium or water. So what happens to the central venous pressure and pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, cardiac output, systemic vascular resistance and venous oxygen saturation? So what happens in these patients? There is decreased central venous pressure and pulmonary capillary wedge pressure. Obviously cardiac output is also decreased. Since there is release of adrenaline and noradrenaline because of vasoconstriction, systemic vascular resistance is increased and venous oxygen saturation, this is decreased. Now see what happens in cardiogenic shock. There is impaired pumping ability of left ventricle, so there is increased preload, and if there is increased preload, what is the problem? The central venous pressure and pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, this will be increased. Obviously cardiac output is decreased. What will happen to systemic vascular resistance? It is increased, and venous oxygen saturation, this will be decreased. Now see, in septic shock there are two phases: hyperdynamic, which is early phase, and hypodynamic, which is late phase. So what happens in hyperdynamic phase? Central venous pressure and pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, it can be increased or it can be decreased. So you can see both. What happens to cardiac output? See here, it is increased, and you have to remember that in hyperdynamic phase of septic shock there is increased cardiac output. Related to systemic vascular resistance, what happens? It is decreased, and venous oxygen saturation, since cardiac output is increased, there is increased venous oxygen saturation. Now what happens in hypodynamic phase? Here also the central venous pressure and pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, it can be decreased or increased, but in this case the cardiac output is decreased and systemic vascular resistance, this is increased, and venous oxygen saturation, it can be decreased or increased. Clear? Now see the neurogenic shock. We discussed that it is because of loss or suppression of sympathetic tone. So here what is the problem? The central venous pressure, pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, it is decreased. Why? Because there is massive vasodilatation. Obviously cardiac output is also decreased. Systemic vascular resistance is decreased because of massive vasodilatation, and venous oxygen saturation, this is also decreased. So what you have noticed here, that in neurogenic shock all these parameters are decreased. Clear? Now see the hypoadrenal shock. In hypoadrenal shock there is decreased central venous pressure and pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, so it is decreased. Cardiac output, we discussed, it is decreased. The systemic vascular resistance, it can be normal or it can be decreased. And what about the venous oxygen saturation? This is decreased. Okay, so this table is very important. What you have to remember? You have to remember here that systemic vascular resistance, this is increased in cardiogenic shock, and there is only one type of shock, hyperdynamic phase of septic shock, where cardiac output is increased and venous oxygen saturation is increased, and all parameters are decreased in the neurogenic shock. Now we are going to discuss the parameters of shock. There are two indexes which are asked. One is shock index and one is modified shock index. What is shock index? Shock index is heart rate divided by systolic blood pressure, and modified shock index is heart rate divided by mean arterial pressure. Okay, so first we are going to discuss the shock index. Okay, it's very easy to understand. It is heart rate divided by systolic blood pressure. Now we are going to discuss the parameters for shock. First is shock index. Okay, so what is this shock index? Yes, it is the heart rate divided by systolic blood pressure. There is another parameter known as modified shock index, and in modified shock index the definition is it's the heart rate divided by mean arterial pressure. Now see, if we have three parameters, heart rate, blood pressure and shock index, clear? Which one is better marker for assessing the severity of shock? So in comparison to heart rate, blood pressure alone, shock index is a better marker. So this is a better marker for assessing the severity of shock. For assessing the severity of shock in comparison to heart rate or blood pressure alone. Clear? And it is also known as hemodynamic stability indicator. Shock index, it is also known as hemodynamic stability indicator. So it is also known as hemodynamic stability indicator. Okay, in exams, which question is asked? Usually they just ask the formula, that what is the formula of shock index and modified shock index. So modified shock index is heart rate divided by mean arterial pressure. So this is heart rate divided by mean arterial pressure. Second question, for mortality rate prediction, which one is a better marker? Shock index or modified shock index? So it's the modified shock index which is a better marker for mortality rate prediction. So modified shock index, it's a better marker for mortality rate prediction. Okay, in comparison to shock index. Now imagine two situations. One situation in which there is high modified shock index, and if there is high modified shock index, so obviously this heart rate is higher in comparison to mean arterial pressure. So there is higher heart rate in comparison to mean arterial pressure, and it suggests what? Hypodynamic circulation. It suggests hypodynamic circulation. So high modified shock index is suggestive of hypodynamic circulation, and just opposite, if there is low modified shock index, it means the heart rate is relatively low in comparison to mean arterial pressure, and it suggests hyperdynamic circulation. So it suggests hyperdynamic circulation. Clear? So this is high modified shock index and low modified shock index. There is another parameter which is asked, and that's known as ROPE. Clear? So what is the full form? It is pulse rate over pressure evaluation. So the full form is pulse rate over pressure evaluation. So it is pulse rate over pressure evaluation. Okay, how to remember? It is ROPE. So can you see rate over pressure evaluation? Right, now it's very easy to remember. See, first is pulse rate. So it is pulse rate divided by pulse pressure. So what is the formula? It is pulse rate divided by pulse pressure. That's why the name is pulse rate over pressure evaluation. So the formula is pulse rate divided by pulse pressure. Okay, this is ROPE. Now you know what is the formula of pulse pressure. Pulse pressure is equal to systolic blood pressure minus diastolic blood pressure. So what will be the final formula of rate over pressure evaluation? Obviously it is the pulse rate divided by systolic blood pressure minus diastolic blood pressure. So these are three parameters which are frequently asked. One is shock index, second is modified shock index, and third is rate over pressure evaluation. What are the various drug of choices in various types of shock? So what are the drug of choices in various types of shock? This question was asked many times, that what is the drug of choice for anaphylactic shock? So the drug of choice is adrenaline. It's the adrenaline. And in cases of cardiogenic shock, it is noradrenaline or dopamine. So cardiogenic shock, it is noradrenaline or dopamine. Clear? In cases of distributive shock, what is the drug of choice? It's the noradrenaline or phenylephrine. So here it's noradrenaline or phenylephrine. Clear? And the easiest, hypovolemic shock. So there is hypovolemia. So what is the drug of choice? Actually it's the crystalloids or fluids. So here we give fluids, and what we have to give crystalloids. Clear? For secondary shock, what is the drug of choice? It's the prazosin. So here it's the prazosin. And if there is shock with oliguria, so the drug of choice is dopamine. So here it's the dopamine. Shock with oliguria. And patients who are having hypoadrenal shock, what we have to give? Corticosteroids. So here the drug of choice is corticosteroids. Clear? And if patient is having sepsis leading to shock, septic shock, so what you are supposed to give? Broad spectrum antibiotics. So drug of choice is broad spectrum antibiotics. Clear? So these are the important points related to shock, and this is all about shock.